In the afternoon of November 28 of 1969, Betsy Aardsma was found dead in the Patty Library at Pennsylvania State University, where she was studying for her master's degree in history. She was only 22 years old. The investigation revealed that Betsy had been stabbed once in the chest with a kitchen knife. Police found a shoe print near the body, but no other significant evidence was found.
Crimes and mysteries.
The gruesome crime of Betsy Aardsma. Born in Holland, Michigan, Elizabeth Ruth Betsy Aardsma was the second of 4 children in the family. Daughter of Esther and Richard Aardsma, Betsy grew up in a middle-class home on West 37th Street. Surrounded by a religious conservative environment, and coming from a family of Dutch descent, her childhood was completely normal. Betsy's father, Richard Aardsma, was a sales tax auditor for the Michigan State Treasury, while her mother was a homemaker. As a child, Betsy Aardsma showed a gift for art and poetry. As a teenager, she had developed a great deal of empathy with people in need, and showed concern for low-income people and the disadvantaged. She attended Holland High School, performing excellently academically, graduating with honors in 1965. Shortly after graduating from high school, in the fall of 1965, Betsy Aardsma enrolled at Hope College, with clear intentions of becoming a doctor. Her roommate, Linda Den Beston, would describe Betsy as a very intelligent and quite fascinating person. By the fall of 1967, Aardsma enrolled at the University of Michigan, where she studied art and English, while sharing an apartment with 3 other students. By her senior year, she had begun dating a medical student named David Wright, who was, by all accounts, her first serious boyfriend. In the summer of 1969, Betsy managed to graduate with honors from said institution. Upon graduating from the University of Michigan, Aardsma initially intended to join the Peace Corps and travel to Africa, although opted to enroll at Pennsylvania State University instead. When she learned that Wright, her boyfriend, intended to attend Penn State, in early October 1969, Aardsma enrolled at Penn State. She resided on campus in Atherton Hall and shared her residence with a student named Sharon Brandt, who would later recall that Betsy rarely participated in extracurricular activities and spent much of her free time studying, while on weekends, she traveled to Penn State Hershey to be in the company of her boyfriend Wright. Day of the crime. On the afternoon of November 28 of 1969, Betsy Aardsma and her roommate Sharon Brandt left their dorm to visit Penn State's Patty Library, needing to obtain research material for their English paper. On the way, the two parted ways, having made plans to meet again later that day with the intention of going to the movies that evening, to see either Easy Rider or Take the Money and Run, 2 films released that same year. At approximately 16 p.m., Betsy spoke with one of her professors, Nicholas Jukovsky, to whom she expressed her intentions to visit the Stack Building. Shortly thereafter, she encountered 2 friends named Linda Marsa and Robert Steinberg, with whom she chatted briefly before entering the library. Once inside the library, she placed her purse, jacket, and a book inside a cubbyhole assigned to her, before walking over to a card catalog. Having found the reference she was looking for, Aardsma walked down a flight of stairs to the main stacks on level 2. This happened at approximately 16:30 p.m. The last possible sightings of Betsy Aardsma alive were in the stacks on level 2, which occurred minutes after 16:30 p.m. when an assistant supervisor named Dean Brungard observed a girl in a red dress standing in a hallway near the west end of the core, speaking quietly to 2 young men. Approximately 10 minutes later, another witness, Richard Allen, while operating a photocopier, heard a conversation between a man and a woman in the general direction of where Betsy was standing. Although Richard Allen could not hear what the two were talking about, he reported to police that it did not sound strange. Moments later, Allen heard a clanking noise before a young man he described as looking like a student ran past him at full speed. The murder. sometime between 16:45 and 16:55 p.m. As Betsy Aardsma stood between the dimly lit rows 50 and 51 of the stacked building's BETSY library. She was stabbed once in the left breast, with a kitchen knife. This wound severed her pulmonary artery and pierced the right ventricle of her heart. After the stab wound, Betsy collapsed to the floor near the end of the hallway, pulling several books from adjacent shelves as she fell backward. Two students, João Uafinda and Marilee Eardley, observed a man running from the direction of the commotion, hiding his right hand, and exclaiming, "That girl needs help." Eardley described this man as wearing washable khaki pants, a tie, and a sports jacket. He had well-groomed brown hair, was approximately 6 feet tall, weighed about 185 pounds, and may have been wearing glasses. This individual led the two students into the core where he pointed out the face-down body of Betsy Aardsma, lying amongst scattered books and metal shelves that had also come loose. As Eardley began to check for signs of a pulse, Uafinda observed this individual exit the library. João Uafinda discreetly followed the man upstairs where the individual ran out of the library. Uafinda attempted to chase this man, but the individual outpaced him and was unable to catch up. This subject was last seen running in the direction of the recreation room. As Uafinda attempted to pursue the individual fleeing the library, Eardley attempted to perform first aid on Betsy, including mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. Soon joined by a group of bystanders, including a librarian. At 17:01 p.m. a call was made to the campus hospital, the Rittenauer Health Center. While first responders initially reported that a girl had collapsed in the BETSY library, two student paramedics were dispatched to the scene, arriving a few minutes later. Aardsma was quickly placed on a stretcher and taken out of the library via service elevator, and then taken to the health center. While paramedics continued to perform CPR, the summoned ambulance transported Aardsma to the health center. Although Aardsma was wearing a white turtleneck sweater at the time of the stab wound, the wound only produced a small amount of visible blood. However, Aardsma was also wearing a red sleeveless dress over this sweater at the time of her murder. And the clothing she was wearing was of a thick material for the November weather, meaning that the single tear the knife made in her clothing was not immediately visible. As a result of the shock of the attack, Betsy had urinated at the spot where she fell. As a result of these events, the non-medical persons who discovered her body, as well as the first aid students called to the scene, in response to reports that a student had fainted in the library, initially believed that Betsy Aardsma, in fact, had fainted due to a seizure or some other non-critical medical ailment. Shortly after Aardsma was transported to the medical facility, a higher-ranking doctor observed blood seeping through her clothing. As the two student paramedics continued to perform CPR, the senior physician immediately ordered the two students to stop, to subsequently locate the only stab wound that the girl presented. Elizabeth Ruth, Betsy Aardsma, was pronounced dead by a physician at 17:50 p.m. Subsequent calls by police for the man who alerted students Uafinda and Eardley about the incident and who fled the scene to come forward to give a statement were unsuccessful, and the individual was never identified. Autopsy and investigation. Aardsma's autopsy began at 11 p.m. on November 28, and concluded at 4 a.m. the next day. It was performed by the Dr. Thomas Magnani, at the Belfont Hospital in the municipality of Belfont. Magnani concluded that Aardsma had been murdered by a single stab wound that had penetrated her sternum, pierced her heart, severing her pulmonary artery. This would have caused internal bleeding in her thoracic cavity. Death occurred within 5 minutes, and Aardsma would not have been able to scream for help, as she had basically drowned in her own blood. Some type of sexual assault was also ruled out. Signs of petechial hemorrhage were discovered on Aardsma's chest, and minor signs of bruising and abrasions were noted around one ear, that were likely due to Betsy falling onto the library floor. Magnani also said she believed Aardsma's killer had intentionally targeted her heart when stabbing her while facing her, and that her attacker was a right-handed individual. Pennsylvania State Police assigned approximately 35 officers to investigate Aardsma's murder. These state troopers were assigned to use the book building as an operations center. While investigations were conducted, and hundreds of students were interviewed in the weeks following his death. The entire campus was searched unsuccessfully, in an attempt to locate the murder weapon, and a $25,000 reward was offered for information leading to the arrest of Aardsma's killer. Investigators soon discovered that up to 400 people normally entered or left the BETSY library between 16:30 and 17 p.m. on a Friday. Although on the date in question, only about 90 people had done so, none of those interviewed were considered viable suspects. Two identikits of the individual Uefind and Erdely had seen running from the direction where the crime had occurred were created. One with the help of Uefind and a library employee, and another with the data Erdely provided. Although only Erdely's image or identikit was released to the media. Before police were notified of Aardsma's death, the crime scene was severely compromised. As library staff, believing BETSY Aardsma had only fainted, ordered the janitors to clean up urine left on the floor of the library hallway, straighten bookshelves, and restack fallen books. As such, any physical evidence potentially left by her killer at the scene was destroyed or compromised. However, the first police officer to visit the crime scene, Mike Simmers, ordered the area to be secured. A series of small drops of fresh blood, matching Aardsma's blood type, were recovered from the staircase leading to the main bookshelves of level 3, indicating that his killer had left the library via this route. Several factors in the circumstances surrounding Aardsma's death led police to believe that she likely knew her killer, as her assailant had evidently approached from the front, in a line too narrow for one individual to pass another unless one of them turned around, and she had made no attempt to scream or run away. A thorough investigation and interrogation also led investigators to rule out any possibility that she had been harassed. Given that BETSY was not expected to be at Penn State that day, but instead was expected to be with her boyfriend, who was quickly eliminated as a suspect in the investigation. Furthermore, although Aardsma had recently expressed to an acquaintance her budding concerns about becoming a doctor's wife and being a mother while still young, none of her diary entries, or the letters she wrote regularly to her boyfriend, indicated that she had felt reluctant about her prospects for a relationship with David Wright. Nor was it ruled out that she had been interested in another suitor, or that she had felt intimidated or uncomfortable by another person during the 8 weeks she had been enrolled at Penn State. Other theories investigated have included the possibility that Aardsma might have witnessed a homosexual encounter in the library, or the presence of an exhibitionist, or inadvertently stumbled upon a man who had masturbatory fantasies, and was murdered to ensure her silence. This theory was given particular credence by researcher Michael Much, who speculated that Aardsma might have observed two men having sex, recognized one or both men, and been killed to prevent her from divulging what she had seen to others. A few hallways from where Aardsma had been murdered, in a section of the core used to store spare desks and shelves, investigators observed a desk with a seat pushed back. On top of this desk was a half-empty soda can and a small stack of straight and gay pornographic magazines, some dating back to October and November 1969. In addition, more than 24 pornographic magazines were found hidden among books in the hallway where she had been murdered, and abundant traces of semen were discovered in multiple locations on the floor, shelves, and walls, with one investigator later commenting that traces of semen were virtually everywhere. These discoveries led investigators to conclude that isolated areas of the shelving were used to conduct illicit sexual encounters. Although partial fingerprints were obtained from the soda can, the prints did not match any of the police databases, and all the fingerprints on and in the magazines were dirty and unusable. Other theories that investigators considered were the possibility that Aardsma might have been killed by a rejected suitor, that she had witnessed a drug deal and been killed to ensure her silence, or that she had been killed because of an outstanding drug debt. However, although Aardsma smoked cigarettes and very occasionally drank alcohol, acquaintances insisted that she did not use drugs. Despite several investigative leads being pursued, and hundreds of potential witnesses being interviewed over several years, no one was arrested for her murder. Prime suspects. William Spencer, one of the suspects in this horrendous crime, was a 40-year-old sculptor who had moved to Pennsylvania from Boston, with his second wife shortly before the murder of BETSY Aardsma. Previously, in May 1960, He had co-founded with his first wife Lena's Coffee, in Saratoga Springs, New York. And he had recently moved to Pennsylvania with his second wife, taking a job as a sculpture professor at a local university. While his wife studied for her doctorate, Spencer was first reported to the police as a possible suspect in the Aardsma murder, after allegedly confessing to killing that girl in the library at a teachers' meeting on Christmas in 1969. These claims culminated in his formal interrogation by researchers in the early 1970s. According to Spencer, he and Aardsma did know each other, but he did not kill her. She had agreed to pose naked in her sculpture classes to earn extra money. He was in the stacks on level 2 at the time of the murder, and had seen the killer, who he claimed was wearing a coat. He immediately offered to build a bust of the individual he had seen for investigators, which he provided to the task force assembled to apprehend the killer. Police quickly dismissed Spencer's claims, as he and his wife had moved to Pennsylvania just weeks before Aardsma's murder, so they didn't have much time to get to know each other. His claims that Betsy had modeled nude for him were never corroborated, and were quickly dismissed by investigators and Betsy's acquaintances alike, as Aardsma was known to be a puritanical young woman. Additionally, it is known that all of the nude models in Spencer's classes had traveled to the university from Philadelphia. Another person on whom the investigators of the case put the magnifying glass was Larry Maurer, a student who initially aroused the suspicions of the investigators for having been a classmate of Aardsma. It is known that Maurer met Aardsma in the weeks preceding her death, and on one occasion invited her out for coffee. It is not known that would have existed any kind of resentment between the two of them. Maurer was cleared as a possible suspect in her murder, although it is unknown whether or not he actually passed a polygraph test. Maurer was a blonde individual, of average height, who did not wear glasses, making his physical appearance noticeably different from that of the individual seen by 3 eyewitnesses fleeing the piles of material on level 2, immediately after Betsy Aardsma was stabbed. Author Derek Sherwood and investigative journalist David DeCoke have published books focusing on the Aardsma murder. Both authors firmly believe that Penn State professor Richard Charles Hefner, then 25 years old and a geology student at the university, was responsible for the homicide. Hefner, an individual highly respected but socially awkward, was known for having reached the point of taking extreme measures to obtain platonic relationships with women, and thus be able to hide his homosexuality. He is known to have once traveled from Pennsylvania to Massachusetts in 1968, to inform a girl he barely knew that he loved her. He had arrived unannounced at her apartment to inform her of this fact, only to be surprised when she slammed the door in his face. It is known that, at the time of the murder, Hefner was residing across Aardsma's courtyard at Atherton Hall, and was widely known for his erratic behavior, which included periodic attacks of explosive anger and the alleged theft of several specimens from the collection of rocks and minerals from the university. He was known to frequently wear khaki pants and a sports jacket, and to keep his brown hair short and neat. His friendship with Aardsma had been ended by the victim shortly before her death. Hefner's name had first been mentioned to investigators days after Aardsma's murder, when her roommate, Sharon Brand, had suggested to police that he be interviewed. According to Brand, Hefner had visited her apartment on more than one occasion in the weeks preceding her death. Hefner was questioned by investigators in early December 1969. He freely admitted to having met Aardsma in late October, and occasionally socializing with her. Though about a week later, she had ended their budding friendship, stating that she wished to remain engaged to David Wright. According to Hefner, he had been dining in a student union building on the evening of November 28. When he first heard rumors circulating about the murder of a student at Patty Library. Additionally, he later felt physically ill upon learning that his ex-girlfriend had been the murdered student. Hefner further claimed that he had never set foot in the library, as he invariably obtained research material from the Deek building, where geology-related literature was stored. The identikit image, created by Uafinda and a receptionist that was never circulated to the media, bears a striking resemblance to Hefner. Furthermore, his syllabus shows that he spent the 2 years following Aardsma's murder studying almost exclusively off campus. In August 1975, two boys who worked at Hefner's family rock shop separately accused him of sexually abusing them. Although his subsequent trial resulted in a hung jury, these accusations led to him subsequently filing a series of vindictive lawsuits. Hefner managed to secure the expungement of records relating to his arrest and trial in 1981. Several years after Aardsma's murder, an acquaintance of Hefner's named Lauren Wright, name unrelated to that of BETSY's boyfriend David Wright, would report that shortly after 18 p.m. on the day of Aardsma's murder, Hefner reportedly arrived home in a state of complete panic, saying, "Have you heard? A girl of whom I was the boyfriend was murdered in the library." After chatting with Lauren Wright for a brief period of time, Hefner left her home. This version contradicts Hefner's official accounts of his movements that he provided to researchers. Lauren Wright did not inform researchers of this conversation until 1976, after an argument with Hefner, who in the decade of 1970 had begun to focus his interests on volcanology. She remained a close acquaintance of Hefner, until the latter died alone in a hospital bathroom, in March 2002. His cause of death was a tear in his aorta, which bled into his lungs, a manner of death similar to that suffered by Aardsma. In 2009, a nephew of Hefner contacted Derek Sherwood, to tell him that, on one occasion, around the year 1975, he had overheard a heated argument between Richard Hefner and his mother. According to this person, the argument had occurred shortly after Hefner's arrest in 1975 for sexual abuse. Hefner, Richard's mother, who was aware of several pedophile accusations made against her son dating back to 1967, would have expressed his concern that the police suspected he had killed that girl at Penn State. She had also scolded him for having drawn police attention, after all her efforts to protect him on the previous occasion. The general context of this discussion indicated to Hefner's nephew that his uncle Richard would have confessed Aardsma's murder to his mother, given that his mother finished her son's reprimand with the phrase, "You murdered that girl and now you're killing me." Despite the efforts of the Pennsylvania State Police and the president of the university, Eric Walker, who had conducted his own private investigation into the murder of Betsy Aardsma, the case slowly grew colder, and the number of investigators assigned to the case dwindled as potential leads to follow became increasingly scarce. The murder of Aardsma remains unsolved. Records related to her murder remain sealed under the state's Open Records Act. However, Pennsylvania State Police are still actively seeking information about the case. Thank you all for making it to the end of the video. If you want, you can leave a comment and a like, so that the video reaches many more people. I send you all a big hug, and I hope you have a great day.